Hey, what's up guys? Coming at you with another discussion video. This one here is centered around a discussion that I originally came across, or a lecture rather, that I originally came across about IQ and how your brain works. A lecture given by Professor Jordan Peterson, and it is the baseline for this whole video. And what he essentially said is that fluid IQ being how quick you learn things and how well you learn them, and crystallized IQ being what you've learned. For example, an IQ test like this one would be about fluid IQ. There's no real way to already know this, as you can change any of them. It's about how good you are at figuring it out. Whereas a standardized test like the SAT for Americans, or QCS for us in Queensland, where everyone is asked the same questions that you should have learnt or you should have learnt how to figure out over the time you spend in life or in school, etc., covers crystallized IQ. So what does this have to do with Rocket League? It's obvious that if someone doesn't play Rocket League for a significant amount of time, they would not be at the same ranked level that they were. However, this could be due to a fact that the person has lost crystallized skill and fluid skill, being that they got worse. This would imply that Rocket League skill is completely fluid and can go up and down over months, weeks, years, or even days, potentially, depending on how you look at it. Or this could be due to the fact that the game evolves constantly and players that get better and leaving that player behind, as they have not gained any ability, leaving them worse relative to their peers, however not to their former self. Obviously, it's entirely possible and even quite likely that Rocket League skill is both fluid and crystallized to an extent. However, in discussing the topic, I aim to figure out whether it is more so one or the other. The more I've thought on this topic, I've come to the conclusion that Rocket League skill is crystallized up until a certain point, and that point moves upwards as your fluid skill goes upwards to make your crystallized skill somewhat of a baseline. In order to demonstrate this, imagine Rocket League was a linear progression skill-wise, which it isn't, obviously, but if it were, let's say that first you learn to drive, then you learn to fly, then you learn to fly off the wall, then you learn to dribble, then you learn to flick, then you learn to air dribble, then you learn to ceiling shot, then you learn to flip reset. Cool. Obviously, it's a crude example, and it nowhere near encompasses everything the game has to offer, but is for demonstrative purposes. So I just listed out 8 things, and when you start out, you have a crystallized IQ or skill of 0 of those things. So you put your fluid skill into learning them, and let's say you get to the air dribble part. You can air dribble, and that's your absolute peak at this point. Then you quit the game for 3 months and come back. Chances are you could no longer air dribble. That level had not been crystallized yet, as it was at the absolute peak of what your fluid skill could do. Okay, so you come back after months, what could you do? Well, it differs from person to person, but I'd venture to say that the majority of people could still probably do everything up until the dribbling, maybe the flicking, if they were at this point in the fictional scenario, obviously the linear fictional scenario, after coming back. So that is their baseline. The crystallized skill does not, or rarely ever does, match the fluid skill when you're striving to get better, as the fluid will keep going up and not all of it will crystallize. The crystallization will almost happen like a level behind. So if your skill is at, like, your fluid skill is at an 8 and you're striving up towards a 9, your crystallized might be at a 7 or an 8 as you go up to a 9. A certain amount will still be left behind if you decide to step away and let that fluid skill decay. Okay, so you come back and you still can perform at the baseline, or the crystallized baseline. What does that mean? Well, it means obviously that your fluid skill is now at the same level as that is crystallized. So in this scenario, are they the same thing? It's something to consider, but I would say probably not still in that scenario, as it is just a point at which the two intersect, and not necessarily something where they are the same thing. It is more just so happens at that point in time that they're at the same value. I must also mention that that this discussion diverts from Dr. Peterson's discussion on fluid and crystallized IQ, because he didn't, or it wasn't really relevant to discuss something which I find very interesting to the current discussion. If you learn to air dribble, going back to the other scenario, then you leave, come back, you can't do it anymore, so your fluid skill isn't there anymore. But then you put in the effort and you learn it again. Chances are it will take you much less time to learn it the second time. This has been anecdotally shown by channels such as Mike Boyd, where he learns skills over and over. That's all he does, is learn new skills. And there have been times on the channel where he relearns a skill, such as breaking a glass with his voice, that he had lost, and it takes him much less time to learn it the second time. So if he cannot do it when he goes back to it, and it is not so, if he is unable to do it when he goes back to it, then it is not crystallized or fluid at that point. However, he is able to learn it much more quickly the second time. Why is this, and what does it really fall under? If we relate this back to Rocket League, I would say that the thing that becomes crystallized at the height of your fluid skill when you take a break is the baseline discussed earlier. However, it is also the ability to learn what your peak fluid skill was at. So in that case, it's the ability to learn to air dribble. It's the knowledge of the process that has been crystallized, the knowledge of the process of what you have to do to get there again. You've crystallized the ability effectively to return to that level of play or do that mechanic or whatever the case may be. So when we consider is Rocket League skill fluid or crystallized, it would seem to me that Rocket League skill is at any given point fluid, what you can do at that particular day, that particular moment, whatever. However, the fluid skill can be influenced by what has become crystallized over time. This discussion becomes much more different and hard to analyze when it comes to pro players, as they have made the mechanics of the game more or less completely crystallized and they can do the mechanical side of the game on autopilot. So that all that is left is the mental decision making for them. For these players, it is hard to make a distinction between their fluid and their crystallized skill. We'll have to see if one day JNaps can leave the game alone for a year and still be nutty after a comeback. I don't have all the answers, and I'd really love for this to be a discussion thing where you guys can have a discussion and voice your opinions. Cheers for watching, subscribe, like, and all that cringy shit the YouTubers beg for. Thanks, guys.